don't erase anything, just keep with me, because if you chose to do it a different way, that might be okay. So here I'm going to go ahead and distribute to start with. So AX, and you know what, sometimes I like to keep track of that just by drawing an arrow, just to make sure I go, oh yeah, I'm distributing it into both terms. All right, so AX minus A times C equals C times A. C times A, why don't I just write it alphabetical? Am I allowed to do that? Is C times A the same as A times C? Yes, of course it is. We learned that. It's the commutative property of multiplication. So we go ahead, instead of C times A, I'm going to say A times C. That's allowed. And then C times B, but once again, commutative property of multiplication. So plus B times C. All right. Next, I need to get X by itself. I can't undo multiplication before I undo my subtraction. And I'm allowed to just go ahead and use that addition property of equality, plus AC, plus, I have a like term here, so I'm going to write it underneath there. Did you catch that? So AX equals 1AC plus 1AC, same variables raised to the same powers. So it equals 2AC plus BC. And last but not least, division property of equality. Now I'm going to go ahead and reemphasize something that we commented on, but I want us to really start thinking about doing this. Let's have that hug, those parentheses, so it really shows us that we have to do this before we divide by the A. Was that how you chose to do it? Or did you catch that other way that we could do it? Because once again, sometimes I go the long way when actually, look at this. A times the quantity. I'm allowed to undo that multiplication right here, so I can go ahead and use division property of equality so long as I divide the entire thing by that A, in which case I'm left with X minus C equals C times A plus B, all divided by A, and then addition property of equality, add C, add C. Now this may not look quite as nice, but it actually is equivalent, and we got there in 2 steps. Did you do it that way? So which one do you think looks better? I think this whoa, wait a second! I didn't kind of finish the last thing here. Ah! Whew! All right, so we had X equals parentheses 2AC plus BC, all divided by A. Now these are equivalent answers. We know they are because we did our steps correctly, but this one obviously looks a little bit nicer. They both work.
All right, look at this. We got 2 more examples, and I bet you could totally roll with these. So pause, try them, we'll check back in. Let's see how you did. So if I want to get X by itself here, I could multiply both sides by B and then divide both sides by A. But if I want to kill this in one step, I could, say it with me, multiply by the reciprocal. If you have something being multiplied by the variable you want, and that something is a fraction, you could totally multiply by its reciprocal, take care of it all in one dang step. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. Boom, bam, boom, done. X equals, I don't know how I want to say this. I could say C times B divided by A, or I could say C times B all divided by A, or I could alphabetize it. X equals BC all divided by A. All right, let's move on and check L. Okay, so in every other problem we've done, we've gotten rid of the addition and subtraction part first. Wait a minute though. This right here, this means that there's an implied hug here. So hug it out and keep them together, they're buddies. So that means I'm not gonna subtract the B off first, it's trapped in here with the X. So how could I take care of this? Divided by C. Well, inverse of divisions, multiplication. Multiply both sides by C. Get it? Divide out my C's. I have X plus B. Ooh, I guess I didn't really need to write it in a hug anymore now that this is gone. So I'm going to get rid of that and just have X plus B equals AC. Now I'm going to subtract B from both sides. X equals AC minus B. Shazam.
All right, you might have noticed that we started kicking things up a notch, but we know you can do it, and this is really good skill building. So let's get after this one. Once again, we have X minus C all divided by A. I'm gonna go ahead, I really want us to be in this habit of remembering that that is in parentheses. That is in an implied hug. You cannot get in here and just add that C out. So of course, my first step is going to be to undo that division. So multiplication property of equality. Multiply by A on both sides. Yikes, this is getting really crazy. Be careful. Multiply by A on both sides. What am I going to do over here? All right, I kicked that up a notch because I used like the grouping bracket because I already have parentheses there. And remember, it's times that A and times that A. Whew, we are so going to clean this up. The A's over here will divide out. Then I have X minus C. I no longer need the hug because that is the only thing that's over here at this point. Equals, I'm going to use the commutative property of multiplication, pull the A up front, and now I can just use parentheses. So B divided by A plus D. Oh, yuck. This is looking yucky. I know that all I need to do is add the C and move it over, but I really can't stop myself. I'm going to clean this up just a teeny bit. I'm going to go ahead and distribute the A into the parentheses. So I have X minus C equals A times B over A. Well, when I do that, the A's would divide out and I just have B. And then A times D. So B plus AD. And now I can do my addition property of equality. Just made me feel better. And I end up with X equals B plus AD plus C. Okay, so you might have said, wait a second, I don't know if I would have thought to distribute that. And that's okay. We could have done addition property of equality right here. The thing is, if we were checking an answer, it would probably have been simplified down here. So it's not so much that you couldn't have stopped up here just by adding the C, it's that you need the skill to be able to check for an equivalent answer.
All right, so N. Guys, we're gonna stick together on this one because this one has some weird stuff going on. Like for one, this is the first time X has been in the denominator. Ew. My first big task is to get X out of the denominator. Now there's two ways I could do that. I could technically multiply both sides by X, because I'm still maintaining equality, or I could multiply both sides by CX. So let's go ahead and try both ways. Since I really am just solving for X, maybe the first way is just to multiply by X. Okay, I know that seems goofy because then I'm leaving C behind, but you know, we'll see what happens. So I'll multiply both sides by X over here, so technically those divide out. I'll go ahead and show that. So B minus A, all divided by C, now without the X, equals D times X. And then all I gotta do is get rid of this D that's in front of my X through, you know, like this is multiplication. So technically, the inverse of multiplication would be to divide, but do you see what yucky thing's gonna happen? I'm gonna have a double fraction, and that is not okay. So remember, instead of dividing by D, I could use the inverse property of multiplication and multiply by 1 over D on that side, multiply by 1 over D on this side. Ooh, I gotta hug that out, so make sure you add those parentheses there. Now I'm gonna actually multiply. 1 times B minus A is just B minus A. I'm still gonna hug it out just to be safe. All divided by D times C. So CD, because commutative property of multiplication, equals these D's divide out, and now I just have X. I actually really like that way. Normally we would write X equals first, and we can do that because of the symmetric property. Now remember, we could have done this another way where we multiply by CX, but really this gave me a beautiful answer, so I'm happy with it. But if you want to go back and try it that way, feel free.
Are you getting tired? Don't get tired. We only have a few more to do, and honestly, this is such good stuff. I don't know if you're feeling excited, but you should, because this is amazing. All right, look at this one. I have X. It's in 2 places. How do I solve for X? Well, I need to get it to be in one spot. CX plus DX, CX plus DX equals E. What? Okay. This reminds me of distributive property. So the proper terminology is that I'm going to factor out an X from both terms. But in your head, it's a-okay to think I'm going to undistribute that X. Pull it back outside the set of parentheses. So let's go ahead and try. Take the X out, factor the X out, factor it out, and X times what gives me CX? X times what gives me DX? See, we just undistributed the X. What's the proper term? Factor. And then we actually have a pretty easy problem here because it's X times the quantity of C and D. And we're allowed to just go ahead and take that whole answer and divide it out because it's X times, and I'm undoing the multiplication here. Final answer, x equals E divided by the quantity C plus D. Do we need the hug? We can always have the hug. So I would hug it out.
Are you ready for the last example? Here we go. Okay, P. So I'm gonna start with you on this one and then I'm gonna have you take over at some point. So I have X in 2 places again, just like in Mrs. Peart's example, except for, oh my gosh, they're on separate sides of the equal sign. So first thing I'm gonna wanna do is definitely get my X's on the same side of the equal sign. So I'm gonna subtract dx to the other side. That way they're together. AX minus dx, I'm putting my X's together, and then minus that C that was there equals, these two are gone now, so B's the only thing left behind. I have these 2 X's, so I really want to use Mrs. Peart's strategy from before where I factor out. C doesn't have X with it, so I'm just gonna add C to the other side. So now I'm gonna have AX minus DX equals B plus C. Woo woo! Looks a lot like the problem that you just did before. So why don't you take over from here, pause, and we'll check our answers. So I've done my 2 steps, and it looks like my final answer is going to be that B plus C on the numerator, but I'm gonna go ahead and hug that out, okay? And then divided by A minus D. Okay, so we found X like 27 times it feels like.
I know, but we didn't find the X.
Man, I just can't even... Wait a minute.
Are you kidding me?
What? It was here the whole time.
Found the X.
Well, at least we learned something.
Yep.
Till next time.